Ruth's incredible journey, a story of loyalty and redemption. Imagine a story where difficult choices shape destinies and, amidst a backdrop of loss and suffering, acts of courage and unwavering devotion emerge. This is exactly what we find in the book of Ruth. Set in a period of crisis for Israel, during the time of the Judges, this short book contains a powerful narrative rich in meaning, showing that even in the darkest of circumstances, faithfulness to God and neighbor can bear surprising fruit. Have you ever stopped to think about how seemingly small decisions can completely transform your life? Or how loyalty to someone can redefine not only your future, but that of entire generations? The story of Ruth is just that, an account that highlights how commitment, even in the face of adversity, can be rewarded by God in ways we can't even imagine. This is not only a love story between a man and a woman, but also a powerful metaphor about the relationship between human beings and God. Throughout this video, we'll dive into this exciting biblical narrative, exploring how each chapter of the book reveals profound aspects of divine providence and the importance of our decisions and relationships. Stay with me until the end and discover how the journey of a foreign woman became intertwined with the lineage of King David and, eventually, with the coming of the Messiah. Ruth's decision. In the first chapter, we are introduced to a woman called Naomi, who, together with her family, leaves Bethlehem because of a great famine ravaging the land. They move to Moab, a foreign land where her husband, Elimelech, dies. His two sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. However, in a cruel twist of fate, both sons also die, leaving Naomi desolate, without a husband and children, with only her two daughters-in-law. It was at this point that Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, having heard that the Lord had visited her people, bringing bread back to the land. However, she asks her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab so that they can rebuild their lives there. Orpah tearfully decides to stay, but Ruth, in a show of unwavering loyalty, chooses to follow Naomi. "Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay." Ruth 1 verse 16. Ruth's commitment is more than a promise to a person. It is a step of faith towards the God of Israel, a decision that would change her life and history forever. On their return to Bethlehem, the two women are welcomed by the community, but Naomi expresses her bitterness at being called Mara, saying that the Almighty has treated her harshly. However, the chapter ends on a hopeful note. They arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, a sign that God was about to provide for them in unexpected ways. The meeting with Boaz. At the start of the second chapter, Ruth, once again showing her courage and willingness, asks Naomi for permission to go out into the fields to gather ears of corn, as permitted by the Mosaic law for the poor and foreigners. Without knowing it, she ends up working in the field of Boaz, a close relative of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. Boaz, upon discovering who Ruth is, shows her great kindness, allowing her to harvest in the best parts of the field and even instructing his servants to purposely leave ears of corn so that she can harvest more easily. He protects her and recognizes her loyalty to Naomi, blessing her for seeking refuge under the wings of the Lord. Boaz is a just and generous man, and his actions demonstrate God's provision for those who trust in God, even in foreign lands. Upon returning home with a generous amount of barley, Ruth shares with Naomi everything that has happened. Naomi, recognizing God's hand at work, reveals to Ruth that Boaz is a rescuer, someone who, according to Jewish law, can redeem the family inheritance and possibly even marry Ruth to perpetuate Elimelech's name. This is where the plot begins to unravel, and the audience begins to realize that something much bigger is going on behind the scenes of this story. Quick pause. If you're finding this discussion valuable, you'll love our ebook, Faith and Finances, The Biblical Guide to Wealth. It dives deeper into the principles of faith and finance directly from the Bible, offering practical insights to help you thrive spiritually and financially. Grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial journey with biblical wisdom. The proposal on the threshing floor. In the third chapter, Ruth's narrative takes an even more intriguing turn when Naomi, realizing Boaz's goodness and the potential for him to be the family's redeemer, proposes a daring plan to her daughter-in-law. As a widow at the time, Ruth was in a vulnerable position. However, the law of Israel offered a solution known as the Levirate law, which allowed a close relative of the deceased to take the widow as his wife and thus preserve the family name. Naomi, understanding this provision and realizing Boaz's kindness, proposed to Ruth an action that would require courage and faith. Naomi instructs Ruth to wash, anoint herself, and put on her best clothes, indicating that she should present herself with dignity and respect. Naomi's strategy is for Ruth to go to the threshing floor, where Boaz would be supervising the threshing of the barley. Once Boaz was resting, Ruth was to lie down at his feet and wait for him to notice her. Although this action might seem unusual by modern standards, it was a deeply symbolic act in Israelite culture. By lying at Boaz's feet, Ruth was, in effect, asking him to take her under his protection, as his redeemer, a legal position he had the right to assume. Ruth, being faithful and obedient to her mother-in-law, follows the plan. She goes to the threshing floor and waits for Boaz to finish his work. When he falls asleep after eating and drinking, Ruth carefully approaches him and lies down at his feet. In the middle of the night, Boaz wakes up with a start, noticing a woman at his feet. When he asked who she was, Ruth, in a gesture of humility, replied, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread your cloak over me, for you are a rescuer." Ruth 3 verse 9. This direct and symbolic request echoes the tradition of the time, where spreading your cloak over someone represented an act of protection and commitment, similar to a marriage proposal. Boaz, surprised and honored by Ruth's attitude, doesn't hesitate to respond positively. He praises her virtue, saying that she could have looked for younger men, rich or poor, but she chose him, recognizing the role he could play in her and Naomi's lives. Boaz undertakes to resolve the issue of the ransom, but mentions that there is a closer relative who has the legal right to redeem Ruth before him. However, Boaz promises that if the other relative refuses, he himself will take Ruth as his wife. Before morning, Boaz instructs Ruth to leave discreetly, to avoid any misunderstanding about the nature of his visit. He also presents her with 6 measures of barley, a sign of his generosity and his commitment to her and Naomi. When Ruth returns to her mother-in-law and tells her everything that has happened, Naomi, now confident that the plan was working, tells her to wait and see how Boaz would resolve the situation, for he was a man of his word and would act without delay. This section of the book highlights Ruth's courage, Naomi's wisdom, and Boaz's integrity. Each character acts with a quiet confidence in God's providence, knowing that he is guiding the process of redemption in ways they could barely imagine. It is a moment of transition, where the destiny of Ruth and Naomi is about to be transformed. Redemption and the lineage of David. In the last chapter of the book of Ruth, the story reaches a conclusion that combines personal resolution with profound historical and theological implications. Boaz, as promised, acts quickly. He goes to the city gate, the place where legal issues and important matters were dealt with publicly. Boaz gathers 10 elders as witnesses to what was about to happen, and calls the closest relative, the one who, according to the law, would have the first right to redeem Elimelech's inheritance and possibly marry Ruth. Boaz begins the negotiation by explaining that Naomi, returning from Moab, is selling the part of the land that belonged to her deceased husband. The close relative initially agrees to buy the land, as it would increase her own inheritance. However, when Boaz mentions that, in buying the land, he must also take Ruth as his wife in order to preserve the name of Elimelech's family, the relative backs down. He explains that redeeming the land and marrying Ruth could damage his own inheritance, perhaps burdening him financially or complicating his family line. This clears the way for Boaz. He formalizes the agreement with an ancient Israelite custom. The next of kin removes his sandal and gives it to Boaz, symbolizing that he was transferring his right of redemption. This public act, performed in front of witnesses, confirms that Boaz now had the right to redeem the land of Elimelech and take Ruth as his wife. Boaz then declares in front of everyone that he is taking Ruth, the Moabitess, as his wife and that he is redeeming Elimelech's inheritance. The elders, together with the people present, bless Boaz and Ruth, saying, "May the Lord do to this woman who comes into your house as he did to Rachel and Leah, the 2 who built up the house of Israel." Ruth 4 verse 11. This blessing is not only a wish for prosperity for the couple, but also a recognition of the historical importance of what was happening. Ruth and Boaz marry, and the Lord blesses this union with a son, whom they name Obed. Naomi, who began the story in great pain and bitterness, now has the joy of holding her grandson in her arms, a new life that symbolizes the restoration and redemption that God has brought to her family. The women of the city also bless Naomi, saying that Obed will be a restorer of life for her, and that Ruth, her daughter-in-law, is more valuable to her than 7 sons. The end of the book reveals that Obed is the father of Jesse, David's father. Thus, the book of Ruth connects the personal story of a Moabite widow to the royal lineage of Israel, culminating in the figure of King David and, eventually, in the Messiah himself, Jesus Christ. The inclusion of Ruth, a foreign woman, in the genealogy of David and Jesus highlights the role of divine grace that transcends ethnic and cultural barriers, showing that God uses the most unlikely circumstances to fulfill his purposes. The book of Ruth offers us a moving narrative of faith, loyalty, and divine providence, showing that God is always working behind the scenes to carry out his plans, even in the most difficult situations. From the devastating loss at the beginning to the restoration at the end, Ruth's story is a powerful reminder that faithfulness to God and neighbor is never in vain. Ruth, a foreigner in Israel, chooses the path of faith by committing herself to Naomi and the God of Israel. Her decision to follow Naomi and trust in the Lord leads her to a future she could never have imagined, not only being redeemed by Boaz, but also being part of the lineage that would lead to King David and, eventually, to Jesus. Her story teaches us that God sees beyond immediate circumstances and is faithful to honor those who seek him with all their heart. Boaz's role as the Redeemer also points to the work of Christ, who redeems his people from a condition of loss and despair, bringing them to a new life of hope and purpose. Boaz acts with integrity and grace, demonstrating the character of God himself, who is always ready to rescue those who place themselves under his protection. Finally, Naomi, who began the story in despair, experiences complete restoration. She, who lost everything, now finds herself with a grandson in her arms, and her joy is a testimony to God's restorative power. The book of Ruth reminds us that, even when all seems lost, God is at work to bring redemption, restoration, and new opportunities for life. This story of Ruth is therefore a timeless inspiration, showing that our choices of faith and faithfulness can not only transform our lives, but also impact future generations. It is a story of hope, courage, and God's gracious providence. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more discussions on how to live out your faith in today's world. Let's continue to grow together in truth and grace. Ebook, Faith and Finances, The Biblical Guide to Wealth. It dives deeper into the principles of faith and finance directly from the Bible, offering practical insights to help you thrive spiritually and financially. Grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial journey with biblical wisdom.